Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Grief has a funny way of pulling people apart, especially when you've spent your whole life convincing yourself that family sticks together no matter what. That illusion didn't just crack the day my father died. It shattered like glass on hardwood, loud and impossible to ignore. It was a cold Saturday morning in late October, and the church pews felt harder than usual, like they wanted to punish you for being alive when someone you loved no longer was. The sky was gray in that washed-out way that doesn't even bother to rain, just hangs over your head like a threat, like it's waiting to collapse when you least expect it. I wore black, of course, but not because someone told me to. It just felt right. My dad used to say that grief doesn't follow rules. It just moves through you like fog, quiet and slow, until you can't remember what breathing felt like before it came. That morning, I felt that fog in my throat, my chest, even in the bones of my fingers. And still, I held it together. I shook hands with people I barely knew. I hugged old friends of his who smelled like cigars and regret. I nodded politely through eulogies that tried too hard to sum up a life that didn't fit into 5 minutes of polite storytelling. And then, as the organ music swelled and we stood for the final prayer, my sister leaned in. I should have known something was coming by the way she hovered, too close, too still, like a spider waiting to drop. Her voice was a whisper, but not the gentle kind meant for secrets or comfort. It was sharp, surgical, dipped in poison and sweet with practiced calm. "Since you were always his favorite," she said, "just inches from my ear, I deserve more from the inheritance." I didn't turn to look at her. I didn't speak. I just stared straight ahead at the coffin, feeling my stomach clench like someone had grabbed it with both hands. The way she said it, like it was a foregone conclusion, like justice had finally arrived in her favor, made me feel dizzy, like the room had just tilted sideways and no one else had noticed. I didn't know what hurt more in that moment, the fact that she thought I was the favorite, or that she truly believed that gave her the right to take more than what was fair. Emily had always been a difficult person to love. Not impossible, but difficult, like loving a wild animal that might let you pet it one day and bite your hand the next. She was 2 years younger, louder, prettier by some people's standards, and always chasing something she couldn't name. We didn't fight like movie sisters, no screaming in the rain or slamming doors. We fought in silence, in little jabs, in sarcasm sharpened over decades of quiet resentment. Our childhood wasn't broken, but it was far from perfect. Our mom left when I was 14 and Emily was 12, and Dad did his best to raise us, but grief turned him into a quieter man, and responsibility turned me into the third parent. So maybe that's why she thought I was his favorite. Because he leaned on me. Because he trusted me. Because when the bills piled up and he forgot to eat, I was the one who made sure things didn't fall apart. Emily hated that. She hated being the one who was comforted instead of counted on. And I guess, in her mind, that meant I had won something. That I'd earned more than love. I'd earned a payout. After the service, I pushed her whisper to the back of my mind, convinced myself it was just grief talking. People say strange things when their hearts are broken, right? She was mourning too. She'd lost her father, same as me. Maybe she just needed someone to blame, and I was the nearest target. I told myself she'd calm down. That we'd cry together in the kitchen later that week. That the funeral fog would lift, and we'd go back to tolerating each other the way sisters are supposed to. But I was wrong. 3 days later, I got a call from our father's attorney. I had already spoken to him after the funeral. He'd gone over the basics of the will with me, said everything seemed in order. Dad had left clear instructions. The estate was to be split evenly between the two of us. No drama. No surprises. That was the kind of man he was: measured, precise, painfully fair. He didn't leave much room for interpretation, and that was exactly how he wanted it. But now the tone had changed. "Rachel," the lawyer said, voice clipped and formal, "I need to inform you that your sister has officially filed a motion to contest the will. She's claiming undue influence." I remember sitting down slowly, my knees buckling like someone had just taken a bat to the back of them. Undue influence? I repeated, not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe she'd had the gall to go there. She says you manipulated your father during his illness, he continued, carefully, like he knew how hard the words would land. That you influenced his decisions, limited her access, and may have altered documents. We will need to respond formally. And just like that, the whisper at the funeral turned into a war. Not a cold war, not a silent standoff. This was a legal ambush, and my sister had fired the first shot while I was still wiping tears off Dad's old flannel shirts. The next day, I walked into Dad's office to gather some paperwork. I wasn't looking for anything special, just mortgage statements, bank records, the usual admin cleanup after someone dies. But while digging through his filing cabinet, I noticed something strange, a plain manila folder tucked behind the drawer's metal divider, labeled in thick black marker. For when they turn on each other. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. Something told me this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. Something told me Dad saw it coming long before I did. It didn't take long after the funeral for Emily to start poisoning the air, as if grief wasn't bitter enough already without her dipping her words in venom and passing them around like communion. It began with whispers, always whispers with her, but they traveled faster than you'd think, like smoke curling under doors you thought were closed. One mentioned it casually on a phone call, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I heard Emily wasn't allowed to see your father much in the last months, she said, pausing just long enough for the insinuation to land like a slap. That he was only taking calls from you. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, sweetheart, but still. By the time I spoke to my cousin Pete, who can't even keep track of his own kids' birthdays, much less family drama, he was already half convinced that I'd locked Emily out of the hospital room, forced Dad to rewrite the will, and probably hypnotized him with essential oils while I was at it. It was absurd, but lies are like glitter at a child's party. They stick to everything, and no matter how many times you try to clean them up, they just keep reappearing in the worst possible places. I tried to stay calm. I tried to believe that anyone who really knew me would see right through it. But here's the thing about grief and gossip, they feed off each other like starving wolves. People are desperate to make sense of loss, and sometimes the easiest way to do that is to turn someone into the villain. And in Emily's version of our family saga, I was the cold, calculating sister who stole Dad's final days and hoarded his love like it was gold I buried in the backyard. And sure, I'll admit it, I was there more. I brought him groceries, handled his medications, drove him to appointments. I sat next to him in that damned recliner every Friday while we watched old war documentaries and pretended we weren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was there when he coughed up blood. I was there when he forgot my name for a full minute and stared at me like I was a stranger. I was there when the nurse said he's slipping and Emily was too busy vacationing in Miami to answer her damn phone. But I didn't hold that over her. I didn't shove it in her face. I didn't need to. Dad knew. I thought that was enough. Apparently, it wasn't. The day the notice arrived from her attorney, I was already expecting something, but I still felt that gut punch when I opened the envelope. She had gone through with it, full lawsuit, filed in probate court, claiming undue influence and requesting the will be overturned. The phrase she used, emotional coercion in a vulnerable state, was printed right there in bold. My sister was accusing me of manipulating a dying man, and the worst part wasn't the insult to my integrity, it was the sheer cruelty of it. Like all the late nights, the emergency room visits, the hand-holding during morphine dreams meant nothing compared to the bitterness she'd carried around since we were kids. My hands shook as I flipped through the packet, but something in the documents made me stop cold. In the official will summary, under one section labeled Exhibit A, Handwritten Amendments, there was a timestamp that didn't match what I remembered. It was listed as January 16th, but Dad had been in the ICU that entire week, barely able to speak, much less write. The amendment wasn't major, it just reaffirmed the 50-50 split and added a few notes about the house. But still, The date was off. Way off. And that one little clerical error, whether it was a typo or a nurse's misfiled timestamp, gave Emily just enough ammunition to sink her teeth in. I called the lawyer immediately, heart pounding like a jackhammer. "This amendment date is wrong," I said, nearly breathless. Dad couldn't have signed anything that day. He was on a ventilator. There was a pause, just long enough to confirm my worst fear. "Unfortunately, Rachel," the lawyer said, voice careful and clinical, "if your sister's legal team proves that your father wasn't of sound mind during any portion of the will execution, it could open the door to contesting the entire estate. We're going to have to gather medical records, witness statements, everything." My legs went weak beneath me. I sat down hard in Dad's old armchair, the one with the cracked leather and the faded cushion from years of wear. I pressed my fingers into the fabric as if I could summon him back with pressure alone. I could already see how this would play out, Emily turning every family memory into a courtroom accusation, painting me as a greedy puppet master while she played the wounded little sister who'd been pushed out of Dad's life. I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. That she could twist something so sacred into something so vile. That she could take my love for our father and reshape it into a weapon. That's when I remembered the folder. I had found it the day after the funeral, tucked away behind a drawer in Dad's study, labeled in his steady, deliberate handwriting, for when they turn on each other. At the time, I had laughed bitterly, thinking it was another one of his little jokes. He had always been pragmatic, bordering on cynical, and he loved leaving cryptic notes for us to find like we were in some twisted family scavenger hunt. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't have the stomach for it. But now? Now I needed whatever was inside more than I'd ever needed anything. I stood up, walked back into his office, and pulled the folder from the drawer with shaking hands. I opened it, and what I found inside made the breath catch in my throat. Because Dad hadn't just anticipated this fight. He'd prepared for it. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone who shares your blood move through life like a stranger, wearing a mask molded from your worst fears. In the weeks after Emily officially filed her suit, our once fractured but somewhat functional sibling relationship morphed into something colder, sharper, and filled with deliberate silence that hung in the air like fog that refused to lift. Family dinners, when they happened at all, became tension-filled performances where every clink of a fork or shift in a chair felt like a warning shot. Our aunt tried to play mediator, hosting a pot roast peace summit one Sunday, but you could have cut the resentment with the same dull steak knife that struggled through the meat. Emily sat across the table with a forced smile and eyes full of ice, asking me how work was like we weren't actively trying to destroy each other through legal documentation. The letter sat on my nightstand for 5 days before I opened it. It had been tucked inside the manila folder behind a stack of old bank documents, bound in an envelope with just one word written in Dad's familiar block print, Rachel. There was something haunting about that kind of preparation, like he had seen the future and had decided not to intervene, but instead left breadcrumbs behind for me to choke on when the time came. The folder had also contained notes, handwritten ones, in Dad's meticulous, steady script. He had documented conversations, added dates, referenced specific moments with both of us, moments I hadn't even remembered until he pointed them out. There was even a page titled Final Wishes, in case of dispute, which felt both eerily calculated and deeply sad, like he'd accepted that his daughters would someday betray the image of unity he tried to build. I finally opened the letter on a Tuesday night, long after the sun had gone down and the sound of cicadas outside had faded into something resembling peace. Jake, my husband, had gone to bed already, wisely choosing not to ask if I was okay. By that point, the answer was always no. The envelope tore cleanly, like it had been waiting patiently all this time, and the letter inside was 3 pages long. My father's handwriting was so familiar it felt like seeing his voice again, and for a moment, I was 16, grounded for sneaking out to a concert, reading his handwritten notes about consequences and respect, while trying to decide if he'd ever love me the way he once loved Mom. But this letter was different. He didn't start with affection. "No, dear Rachel. No, I love you." He got right to it, blunt as ever. "If you're reading this, it means things have gone to hell like I thought they might. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you and your sister are laughing about how dramatic I was. But I doubt it. You two haven't really laughed together since your mother left, and I think part of you still blames each other for how she disappeared." Reading that made something twist in my stomach. He wasn't wrong. Emily's always been difficult. You know that. I knew that. She resented the way you stepped up when I fell apart. She thought it made you my favorite. But she never saw the pressure you carried. She never asked what it cost you to be the strong one. I should have told her more. I should have told you more. I paused, letting those words sink in like they were trying to rewrite every scar I'd hidden under competence. I'd spent so long being the reliable one that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. Forgotten how to ask for comfort, how to fall apart in ways that felt safe. If she tries to take what's not hers, know this. I didn't leave things equal because I was blind. I left things equal because I saw everything. I saw her need to win. I saw your need for peace. I wanted to give you both what I thought you could live with. But if she pushes, I left something behind. Something that will remind her who she really is. It's in the hands of Richard, the lawyer. I gave him instructions. The room felt colder suddenly, like the letter had summoned something into the air. This isn't revenge. It's a reminder. She may try to rewrite history, but I wrote it first. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking so hard the pages crinkled. I sat there for a long while, staring at the letter, wondering what my father had really meant by reminder. I had expected comfort. I had expected wisdom. I hadn't expected him to leave a loaded gun in the form of a posthumous message. And then came the email. It hit my inbox the next morning at 8:23, subject line, "Will reading, date moved up, public session requested by Emily Langston." Just like that, the lawyer's office was no longer just a private room with quiet answers. Emily had demanded that the reading be conducted in front of all living family members and 2 estate witnesses. Her reasoning? To ensure transparency and reduce further manipulation. I could practically hear her smugness dripping off the email. I closed the message and leaned back in my chair, letting the words echo in my mind. So this was how it would happen. Not in private. Not in peace. Emily wanted a stage. She had no idea what was waiting behind the curtain. The thing about public will readings is that they're supposed to be boring, civil, procedural, like watching a black and white courtroom show with none of the suspense and all of the awkward silences. But as I sat in that overheated conference room at the back of the lawyer's office, surrounded by blood relatives who now felt more like strangers at a bad reunion, I knew this wasn't going to be one of those quietly forgettable moments. This wasn't going to be routine. Not with Emily sitting across from me in a blazer that looked like it belonged to a hostile real estate agent, her lipstick too bright, her chin tilted just slightly too high, like she'd already decided she was the main character and the finale was hers to control. We were maybe 15 minutes into the reading when the tone in the room shifted, like the wind before a storm changes direction and you can suddenly smell something electric in the air. The lawyer, Richard Barnes, a man who had worked with my father for more than 20 years and whose voice normally inspired the emotional thrill of a filing cabinet, cleared his throat in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. His eyes scanned the page again, then flicked up toward Emily with something I couldn't quite read. Smugness? Resignation? Pity? Maybe all 3, mixed with just enough amusement to make me sit up straighter in my chair. "So," he said, folding his hands neatly on the table in front of him, "the will, as previously outlined, remains legally intact and unchallenged at this time. The primary estate, including the house, accounts, and assets, will be split evenly between Rachel Langston and Emily Langston, as per your father's documented wishes." I didn't look at Emily, but I could feel her smirk stretching across the table like a rope, taut and gleaming. She probably thought she'd won. Equal was still a victory for her, because in her mind, it meant I hadn't gotten more. That was all she ever cared about. Not fairness. Not healing. Just control. But then Richard's voice dropped slightly in pitch, and his next words landed like a match on gasoline. However, he continued, reaching slowly into a small envelope that had been sitting to his right the entire time, untouched until now. Your father also included a personal addendum. It is not legally binding in terms of asset division, but it was his express wish that it be read aloud, in its entirety, in the presence of both daughters and any witnesses present at the time of the will execution. He slid the envelope open with a precision that felt like theater, the rustle of paper suddenly louder than it should have been. I turned my head slightly to catch Emily's face, and that smirk, God, that stupid, triumphant little smirk, was already beginning to wilt at the edges like a flower left in the sun too long. Richard unfolded the letter, took a breath, and began to read. To my daughters, Rachel and Emily, if you're hearing this, then I am gone, and I imagine you're both sitting in this room wondering who won and who lost. Let me be clear about something right now. If you think this is a competition, you've both already lost more than you know. There was a pause, the air thickening. I didn't dare breathe. Emily, you've spent most of your life chasing what you believed Rachel had, convinced that she was given more love, more time, more approval. But what you never stopped to ask yourself was what it cost her to carry the weight you refused to touch. While you traveled, she stayed. While you disappeared, she remained. And while I was dying, it was her face I saw more than my own in the mirror. Emily shifted in her chair, her smile now completely gone. Her arms crossed, the color draining from her face in slow, calculated stages like a candle melting backwards. Rachel, you were the anchor when I was too tired to hold steady. I didn't always say it. I didn't always show it. But I saw you. I saw what you gave up. The boyfriends you didn't bring home because I was too sick. The job interviews you rescheduled. The holidays you spent by my side while your sister posted vacation photos. You didn't win anything. You endured. And for that, I am sorry and I am grateful. The letter went on, and I felt my throat tighten around words I didn't even know I needed to hear. It wasn't about money anymore. It never had been. This was something deeper. Something older than either of us wanted to admit. To both of you, I knew this would happen. That one of you would question the division of things, because the love between sisters is as fragile as it is fierce, and this family has always been more shadow than sunlight. So I'll leave you with this. The house is yours to share or to sell. But inside the basement safe is a box marked with both of your names. Its contents belong to neither of you until you both agree to open it together. If you can't do that, then leave it shut. You'll both lose more than you think if you open it alone. There was a pause, longer this time. Richard looked up from the page. No one moved. And finally, to Emily, if you ever wondered why you weren't the favorite, it's because you never wanted to be a daughter. You wanted to be a rival. And I didn't raise rivals. I raised sisters. I hope someday you understand the difference. The last words hit the floor like iron. Richard folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope without ceremony. The room remained silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the shuffling of someone's foot against carpet. I didn't say anything, neither did Emily. But I saw her hands. They were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. The lawyer didn't need to say anything more. There were no questions. Because whatever came next, it wasn't going to be legal. It was going to be personal. There's a peculiar kind of silence that comes after someone is thoroughly, brutally humiliated in public, one that buzzes with the tension of everything unsaid, everything restrained, like the air just before thunder cracks. That's exactly what filled the room after the lawyer finished reading Dad's letter aloud. You could practically hear the static between my sister and me, this heavy, invisible rope stretched tight between us, ready to snap. Emily didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, breathing hard through her nose, trying to hold her face together like a bad poker hand after someone called her bluff and laid down a royal flush. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood, slowly, her chair scraping the floor like a threat, and walked out of the room with the kind of calm that makes you nervous, like the quiet before a gas explosion. The rest of the family followed suit, trickling out one by one, eyes avoiding mine like I had become radioactive. And maybe I had. Maybe, in the end, no one wanted to look too closely at the one who came out ahead, because winning in a family war never looks clean. It looks dirty. It looks like survival. The lawyer gave me a copy of the will, the letter, and a quiet nod of acknowledgement before closing the folder and walking back into his office, leaving me alone in a room still humming with the ghost of my father's voice. For the first time in weeks, no one was talking about me. But also, for the first time in weeks, no one was standing beside me either. When I got home, the letter came with me, folded and stuffed into my purse like contraband. Jake greeted me at the door with a soft, wary expression that told me everything I needed to know. He'd seen Emily's post already. She'd wasted no time, of course. Less than an hour after the reading, she had taken to social media to accuse me of manipulating the lawyer, accusing our late father of emotional cruelty from beyond the grave, and casting herself as the latest heroine in the never-ending saga of poor Emily being wronged by a world that didn't recognize her genius. I didn't even feel mad. I felt tired. Tired in a way that went bone deep, like I'd just run a marathon I hadn't signed up for and wasn't sure I wanted to finish. I sat on the couch, the will and the letter between my hands, staring at nothing, replaying his words over and over again in my head. It should have felt like victory. But it didn't. It felt like picking up the pieces of something that never really belonged to me to begin with. And for a moment, just one, fleeting second, I wondered if maybe Dad had known that too. The next morning, I went back to the house. Our childhood home was still mine, ours technically, but Emily hadn't made a move since the will was read. The lock clicked beneath my hand with that familiar softness, and the smell inside was still so him it made my chest ache. I moved through the hallways like I was walking backward through time, touching picture frames, the edge of the kitchen counter where he used to slice oranges with military precision, the same chair by the window where he'd sit with his Sunday paper and pretend not to eavesdrop on every conversation. And then I went to the basement. It was musty, of course, because basements always are, and the light bulb above flickered once before settling into a low, yellow hum. In the corner, behind an old cabinet and a dusty treadmill we never used, I found the safe, exactly where Dad said it would be, with a combination already written in the notes he left. I spun the dial slowly, the numbers clicking into place, and when the lock finally gave with a soft thunk, my heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the sound. Inside was a single box, taped shut, with our names scrawled across the top in his neat, all-caps handwriting, Rachel plus Emily. I sat down on the floor and just stared at it. My first instinct was to open it. Of course it was. Curiosity, anger, exhaustion, maybe even a desire to finally have something that made sense. But then I remembered his words from the letter, "You'll both lose more than you think if you open it alone." And that's when it hit me he had set this up. Not just the message, not just the will. The whole thing. The safe. The letter. The final performance. He had predicted the war before it began and tried to build a landmine between us that could only be disarmed together. But he hadn't stopped us. He'd just set the pieces and waited for us to destroy each other trying to claim the crown. Maybe he thought it was some twisted form of protection. Or maybe he didn't believe in us enough to do anything else. I left the box unopened. I went upstairs, locked the basement door behind me, and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands. When Jake asked me that night if I was okay, I said yes. But I lied, because the truth is, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd crossed some invisible line I couldn't come back from, like I'd finally become the person my sister had always accused me of being, and somewhere, deep down, a part of me had stopped trying to prove otherwise. Dad had wanted to protect his legacy, but maybe all he did was poison ours.